It's one thing to lie to the American people. I mean, I think that unfortunately we're almost used to that right now. But then when you lie to them and then you dump on them by effectively insulting them, assuming that, nobody's got a couple of brain cells there, that's when it gets really bad. And that's what this Inflation Protection Act really is, a massive insult to Americans because, in fact, it's going to do anything but that. This Inflation Protection Act is going to do the opposite. And it's really important that we pay attention to this stuff right now. It is so good to have you here. Quick reminder, do me this favor, make sure that you subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Subscribe to the channel. Also do me the favor of going to Apple iTunes and subscribing to my podcast. It's a really big deal. It's really important. This is how Apple knows to promote the podcast to other people. If you just go in there and you subscribe to it, it's all free, of course. Portions of today's program are brought to you by Legacy Precious Metals. There's never been a better time to invest in precious metals than right now. So go to legacypminvestments.com for more. Again, it's legacypminvestments.com for more. All right, I want to turn back to what they're trying to tell us. I mean, this is like spin on steroids. And I get that this is what Washington does, right? We know that. We're all grown-ups here. But this one just feels especially insulting in light of the White House trying to say, well, we're not really in recession. I mean, hey, maybe the recession's transitory. Maybe that's the whole deal. Anyway, Wall Street's catching on. I'm just looking at where the market ended the day on Tuesday, down 402 points there on the Dow. And that's because everybody knows, look, I mean, we are in for more challenging times as the Federal Reserve has no choice but to raise interest rates. And they're going to have to raise them a whole lot more than anybody thinks. I realize they're out there doing all the interviews. Why can't they talk less? Anyway, some of them there on the Federal Reserve Board of Governors think that maybe inflation has peaked. I don't think so. I think inflation is really here. And now the government is coming forward with a spending plan to effectively ensure there's more inflation. I mean, you get over $200 billion going to semiconductor companies. Look, I'm all for having a very strong semiconductor industry. I think that's extremely important. One of the reasons why Nancy Pelosi is in this showdown now with China, the reason why she's in Taiwan and the reason why Taiwan is so important to our economy is because we're dependent on Taiwan for semiconductor chips. That's where all the big semiconductor companies are. Well, I, for one, would rather prefer that we have our semiconductor companies here at home because just like energy, we ought to be independent on the technology front. And so maybe then China wouldn't be as big an issue, right? Maybe we wouldn't have this major standoff if, in fact, we didn't need Taiwan so much. So there's a lot of reasons from a security standpoint, but also an economic standpoint to have strong semiconductor companies. But in this case, the U.S. taxpayer who doesn't have the money, does not have it, is giving out more than $200 billion to the industry. I would just say, what are we getting in return? And I'm not talking about, needing a stake in the company because that would be state ownership of a company, which would be disastrous. But I would like to see the companies at least pay the money back with interest, right? I mean, we're the ones giving it to them. Why are we giving? Why can't it be a loan? Think about that for a second. So the semiconductor thing is going on. Meanwhile, they've got a spending plan, the Inflation Protection Act, give me a break, for $739 billion, $739, that's the overall package. It would include upwards of $433 billion in new spending. So more spending because the government now is going to choose all the winners and losers out there. The government gets to decide who gets this money. It's primarily going to green energy. And look, I don't have a problem with green energy, okay? Like I'm all for all the energy we can get. I'm all about being energy independent, just like I am in terms of our technology, being independent on the technology front. There's so much we need to do to just fortify our country. But it's not through handouts because you're never going to get the best outcome. Solyndra comes to mind, right? Remember that under President Obama? That didn't go so well. We can do this, guys. We can do this, but we need to have the individual the individual with skin in the game. None of these companies have as much skin in the game when they're just being handed handouts by the administration. I mean, that is fundamentally a problem. Anyway, they say it's going to reduce the deficit over the next 10 years by some 300 billion. Great. I'll believe it when I see it, because right now we're on a trajectory where we're just adding to our deficits. We just continue to spend in such a reckless way that ultimately it will affect our standard of living, or at least our purchasing power in the future. And that's really important. You need to think about your purchasing power. The dollar's doing great. I mean, hey, if you're going on vacation, if you can get over the plane fare that you're going to have to face and all the long waits and lines, et cetera, and maybe some lost luggage. If you're going to Europe this summer, it's terrific. You'll get a great deal in terms of the dollar having so much more power overseas right now. That's all great. But you know what? It doesn't matter. When it comes time for retirement, if your dollar does not go as far, or frankly, forget about retirement, in the here and now, if your dollars do not go as far right now, then in fact, you got a problem. And that's what we see over time. You've heard me walk you through this before. I mean, roughly, $100 could buy you what it would take nearly $700 to buy you back in 1972. So in 1972, you had $100 in your pocket. You go out and buy a series of things, a basket of goods. And to buy that same basket of goods today, it would cost like $700, nearly $700. So this is the problem here. And you might say, oh, well, good, wages are going to go up correspondingly. Well, they don't. In fact, if you looked at the overall trajectory of wages from the 1970s through today, in fact, what you've seen is mostly a squeeze on the middle class. So people don't have as much money. And while wages are right now up, they're not up as much as inflation. And that is typically what happens, which is why you don't want all that inflation in the economy, and which is why you want to make sure that you protect the purchasing power of your dollars, which brings me actually, very good segue into one of our sponsors here, Legacy Precious Metals, legacypminvestments.com. These guys are terrific. They can help you figure out how to make sure that you are protecting your portfolio for the future. You can get a gold-backed IRA. You can buy the actual gold itself. I learned from them actually that you can put $1 million worth of gold into a shoebox. Who knew? Anyway, they sell silver as well. So many of you say, Trish, what about silver? And silver is one of those things that I think a lot of people like to trade. There may be more upside, could be more downside as well. It's a little more volatile than gold. Gold right now closing down slightly today, but still hovering around that $1,800, $1,800 an ounce. And to me, anyway, this is something that you invest in for the long haul. So call them at legacypminvestments.com, 1-866-589-0560. And let's talk again about where we're heading, because if Schumer gets this thing through, I'm sorry, but give me a break. Again, dumping on the American people, trying to tell us that this is going to reduce inflation. Sorry, last time I checked, guys, when you spend money and thereby print dollars and put them into circulation, it actually causes the value of dollars to go down. And when the value of the dollar goes down in terms of its ability to purchase things in the overall economy, then guess what? Inflation goes up. And that's why we've had this environment. You had $1.9 trillion worth of spending shortly after Joe Biden came to office, coupled with an estimated $6 trillion from the Federal Reserve in terms of, that's like pure money printing, buying up of mortgage-backed securities and also treasury bonds. All of this takes an effect. So you get all that money out there. And now as the Fed pulls back, we're risking this inflationary yet recessionary environment. And what is that? That is stagflation. And I don't know how they get out of this cycle anytime soon. I really don't. And I think that's what you saw reflected in the market today. I mean, there were some bright spots. The NASDAQ did a little better than expected, in part because Uber, which, still lost money, lost a little less than expected. Anyway, they had higher sales than some people expected, which, by the way, speaks to the weirdness of this overall environment, right? We're in a very, very weird environment right now because you do have still a very low rate of unemployment, and yet you have this inflation. You're starting to see this pullback in the consumer spending arena. So all put together, the risk is really that Washington's just going to screw it up again. They screwed up all the time. And I think they're going to do it again here. And so I just keep urging people to protect yourself, to protect your family, to think very thoughtfully about what the future is, and to do me the favor of subscribing to the channel, of course. I so appreciate it. And I will see you right back here tomorrow.